There's a force operating on your money right now that requires no market crash, no bad investment, no financial mistake of any kind to do its damage. It operates continuously, automatically, and without your participation or consent. It has been built into the architecture of every modern economy on Earth for reasons that serve certain interests more than others. And the vast majority of people who are aware of it in a general sense have no specific plan to protect themselves from it, which means it is quietly achieving its effect on their financial lives without meaningful resistance. Inflation. Not the abstract economic concept that gets discussed on news programs in terms of percentage points and central bank policy. The specific, personal, ongoing erosion of what your money can actually buy. The gap between the number in your account and the real-world purchasing power that number represents. And why that gap is almost certainly wider for you personally than the headline figures suggest. Let me start with a number that makes the stakes concrete. If you are holding $100,000 in a savings account that pays 2% interest annually, and inflation is running at 3% annually, you are losing 1% of your purchasing power every year in real terms. After 10 years of this, you still have a number in your account that looks like $100,000, or slightly more after the 2% interest compounds. But the goods and services that $100,000 can purchase have declined in real terms. You have not made money, you have lost it, without spending anything, without making any investment decision, without doing anything at all except holding cash, and watching the number stay roughly the same while its real value quietly declined. Most people understand this in a vague, conceptual way. Prices go up, dollars buy less, inflation bad. What most people have not done is sit with the specific implications of this for their actual financial situation, calculated across the actual amounts they hold in low-yield accounts, across the actual number of years they plan to hold them, against their actual personal inflation rate rather than the headline figure. That last point deserves a particular attention because it is where the official inflation narrative diverges most significantly from the financial reality of most households. The Consumer Price Index, the number that gets reported as the official inflation rate, is a national average calculated by measuring price changes across a standardized basket of goods and services. That basket is designed to represent the spending patterns of a typical American urban consumer. It includes housing, food, transportation, medical care, energy, apparel, and various other categories weighted according to their estimated share of average household spending. The problem is that your spending does not match the average basket, and the divergence between your actual spending and the average basket is where your personal inflation rate is determined. If you are renting your home in a major metropolitan area, your personal shelter inflation over the past several years has been dramatically higher than the national average figure in the CPI calculation. Rents in cities like Austin, Miami, New York, and Los Angeles increased by percentages that dwarf the national headline figure during the post-pandemic period. If you are a renter in one of those markets, your actual cost of living increased at a rate that the CPI figure significantly underrepresented. If you have children approaching college age, the inflation rate for higher education has historically run at approximately double the CPI rate over the past 2 decades. If you have significant healthcare expenses, whether through premiums, out-of-pocket costs, or prescription medications, medical inflation has consistently run above the headline rate. If food represents a larger share of your household budget than the average, as it does for lower and middle income households, disproportionately, food price inflation hits you harder than it hits higher income households for whom food is a smaller percentage of total spending. The headline CPI number is a real and carefully constructed measurement. It is not, however, your personal inflation rate. For a significant portion of the American population, the actual erosion of purchasing power they experience is materially higher than what the official figures report. Their savings are losing value faster than even the already alarming headline numbers suggest. There's a second layer to this story that is important to understand, even though it is contested and complicated. The methodology used to calculate the Consumer Price Index has changed significantly since the 1980s. Several of these methodological changes including the introduction of hedonics, which adjusts for quality improvements in products, and substitution effects, which assume consumers shift their purchases when prices rise, have the effect of producing lower measured inflation than the older methodology would have produced for the same set of price changes. Economists who use the older methodology or who study the gap between the current methodology and the pre-1980s approach estimate that real inflation has been running meaningfully higher than the officially reported figures for several decades. This is genuinely contested. Reasonable economists disagree about which methodology better captures the true cost of living for ordinary households. But the possibility that official inflation figures systematically understate what most households actually experience in their day-to-day spending is worth taking seriously when designing a personal strategy for protecting your purchasing power. Now let us look at the standard advice for protecting against inflation, because the standard advice is incomplete in ways that cost ordinary investors real money. When inflation rises, financial media and most financial advisors recommend some combination of the following. Buy equities because stocks have historically outpaced inflation over long time horizons. Buy real estate because property values and rents tend to rise with inflation. Buy commodities because commodity prices tend to move with inflation. Buy Treasury inflation-protected securities because their principal adjusts with the CPI. These recommendations are not wrong. They are incomplete. They are incomplete because they all carry meaningful risk, require either substantial capital or long time horizons to work as inflation hedges, and leave unaddressed the most immediate and most fixable inflation problem that most savers face. The problem of cash and near cash savings sitting in accounts that earn less than inflation, generating a guaranteed real loss every single year, while the account holder waits to accumulate enough capital or confidence to invest in equities or real estate. The most actionable and most underused inflation protection tool available to ordinary American investors is one that almost no mainstream financial content discusses with the prominence it deserves. It is called the Series 1 Savings Bond, commonly referred to as an I-bond, and it is issued directly by the United States Treasury Department. Here's how I-bonds work. The interest rate on an I-bond is composed of two components: a fixed rate that is set at the time of purchase and remains constant for the life of the bond, and a variable inflation adjustment rate that is recalculated every 6 months based on changes in the consumer price index. When inflation is running at 6%, your I-bond pays approximately 6%. When inflation drops to 3%, your I-bond adjusts down to approximately 3%, plus whatever fixed rate your bond carries. The rate moves with inflation because it is explicitly indexed to inflation. The principal of an I-bond cannot decline. You cannot lose money on the nominal value of the investment. The interest is exempt from state and local taxes. Federal income tax on the interest is deferred until you redeem the bond, which gives you control over when the tax liability occurs. I-bonds can be purchased directly from the United States Treasury at their website treasurydirect.gov with a minimum investment of $25. The limitations are real and worth understanding clearly. You cannot redeem an I-bond within the first 12 months of purchase. If you redeem between 1 and 5 years, you forfeit the most recent 3 months of interest as an early redemption penalty. After 5 years, there is no penalty. The annual purchase limit is $10,000 per person per calendar year through Treasury Direct, plus an additional $5,000 per person per year, using your federal tax refund to purchase paper, I-bonds. For most ordinary savers, the $10,000 annual limit is not a meaningful constraint. $10,000 per year in an instrument that guarantees your savings will not fall behind inflation on that portion of your holdings is a significant and accessible form of purchasing power protection. And unlike equities or real estate, it requires no risk tolerance, no long time horizon beyond the initial 12-month minimum hold, and no financial sophistication to access or understand. Treasury inflation-protected securities, known as TIPS, serve a similar function for investors who want inflation-protected exposure that remains liquid and can be held in standard brokerage accounts and retirement accounts. TIPS are issued with maturities ranging from 5 to 30 years, and their principal value adjusts with changes in the consumer price index over their lifetime. They can be purchased directly from the Treasury through a brokerage account, or through TIPS mutual funds and ETFs that provide diversified exposure to the asset class with daily liquidity. The practical difference between I bonds and TIPS for most individual investors is primarily one of access and liquidity. I bonds are purchased directly from the Treasury and have the 12-month minimum hold requirement. TIPS can be held in standard brokerage and retirement accounts, can be bought and sold like other bonds, and are available through low-cost index funds from providers like Vanguard and Fidelity. For money that needs to remain liquid and needs inflation protection, TIPS funds are the more appropriate vehicle. For money that can be committed for at least 12 months and benefits from the tax deferral feature, I bonds offer advantages that TIPS do not. Now let me give you the complete 3-layer framework for protecting your purchasing power across different pools of money with different time horizons. Layer 1 is your emergency fund and short-term cash reserves. This is money that needs to remain immediately accessible and cannot be exposed to market risk or meaningful illiquidity. The inflation protection goal for this layer is not to beat inflation significantly. It is to minimize the gap between what inflation is doing to your purchasing power and what your cash is earning. High-yield savings accounts at online banks consistently offer rates significantly above what traditional bank savings accounts pay. Money market funds at major brokerages offer similar rates with similar liquidity. Short-term Treasury bills, which can be purchased directly from the Treasury or through a brokerage account, offer rates tied closely to the federal funds rate and provide direct government backing. For money in this layer, moving from a traditional savings account, paying 0.01% to a high-yield option, paying rates that are meaningfully higher, is the most immediately impactful change available to most savers. Layer 2 is your medium-term savings. Money you do not need immediate access to, but are not committing to a long-term investment horizon. Money in this layer should be working harder than cash, but cannot accept the volatility of equities. I bonds belong here. Short-term TIPS funds belong here. A laddered portfolio of Treasury bills with staggered maturities belongs here. The goal for this layer is to preserve purchasing power as close to completely as possible while maintaining the ability to access the funds within a reasonable time frame. Layer 3 is your long-term investment portfolio. Money you are not planning to access for 10 years or more. Over these time horizons, the evidence is very strong that a diversified portfolio of equities has historically outpaced inflation by a meaningful margin in real terms. This is the layer where the conventional advice, broadly diversified equity index funds held for the long term, is genuinely appropriate and genuinely effective as an inflation hedge. The reason it does not belong in layers 1 and 2 is the volatility and the time horizon requirement, not any fundamental weakness as an inflation hedging asset class over long periods. The mistake that most people make with inflation is treating all of their money as though it belongs in a single layer with a single strategy. Either they keep everything in cash and lose purchasing power slowly and guaranteed, or they invest everything in equities and expose short-term needs to market risk that is inappropriate for that time horizon. The 3-layer framework assigns each pool of money to the strategy appropriate for its specific time horizon and liquidity requirement, which produces better outcomes across all 3 without requiring any of them to do a job they are not suited for. Inflation is not a temporary condition that will resolve itself and stop requiring your attention. It is the permanent background condition of every modern economy with a fiat currency managed by a central bank with an inflation target operating in a world of continuously expanding credit. The specific rate fluctuates. The direction is structurally upward over time. Building a specific, layered strategy to protect your purchasing power against that structural reality is not an optional enhancement to your financial plan. It is a foundational requirement. The money you are not protecting from inflation is losing value every day. Not dramatically, not visibly, but consistently and compoundingly in ways that add up to significant purchasing power erosion over years and decades. The tools to protect against it are accessible, some of them at the cost of nothing more than $25 and an account at treasurydirect.gov. The only thing standing between your savings and the inflation erosion they are currently experiencing is the decision to build a specific plan to address it. Next week on Quiet Rich, I'm covering the complete 12-month framework for building substantial net worth from zero with a specific sequence of decisions the real math behind the targets, and the 2 mechanisms that make the numbers work even on a normal income. Subscribe so you do not miss it. New videos every Tuesday and Friday.